Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So in my last two videos I've covered most of Garrett's video, A Message to the Men's Rights Movement. There's still a little bit to go, and the little bit that's left I've pretty much covered most of the main points in my previous video, but there's still a couple of things I should address, and there's a couple of points that I could have addressed last episode but just basically ran out of time. So I will be addressing them briefly here. Hopefully I won't take too long to get through this last little bit, and I'll get started on Garrett's second MRA video. That is the second Garrett video about MRAs. Technically it was his first video about men's rights, so I'm not responding to these chronologically. So without any further delay, let's get stuck into it.
Third wave feminism generally regards people who do stuff like blocking doors and pulling fire alarms red fems because we want to distance ourselves from them and their actions.
Yes, but just because you want to distance yourself from them doesn't actually mean you get to label them as radical feminists when they're not radical feminists. So you use the example of the University of Toronto protest, and you claim that these people are radical feminists. The most famous one of which is Chanty Binx, and as you can clearly see from Chanty Binx's Tumblr page, she basically says she is not a radical feminist. She clearly states that she is not a rad fem. Furthermore, she also is very critical of TERFs. Okay, she actually supports trans rights, and she accuses the MRAs of being just like rad fems. Of course, you know, that's typical, isn't it? You just project all your dislikes onto the MRA label. That's what typically happens. That's why TERFs think that MRAs are using trans women as a plot to, I don't know, destroy women or something, and mainstream feminism just thinks MRAs are trans exclusionary like the rad fems. But it's pretty clear that Chanty Binx does not consider herself a rad fem. So I have to ask, what gives you the right to consider her a rad fem, and what evidence do you have that she belongs to the radical brand of feminism as opposed to the mainstream, apart from the fact that she took part in a protest that you're trying to distance the mainstream from? You said earlier in your video that you were accused of no true Scotsmanning, and you claimed that this was false because you don't deny that rad fems are actually feminists. Although this is technically true, I would accuse you of no true Scotsmanning mainstream feminism. It seems that all you want to do is push out anyone who you disagree with. You want to push them out of the mainstream and just declare that they're a rad fem, even though there's no evidence to suggest that they are. And you do this while making false claims about non-MRAs. Well done, Garrett, well done. But we'll get to that in a minute or two.
My message to men's rights activists is, do the same thing. If you really want to achieve activist goals to do with men's rights, you need to distance yourself from this toxic anti-feminist stuff and make a new group. Make a second wave of the men's rights movement. Clearly and explicitly reject all this toxic shit.
Okay, so as I stressed last video, being critical of feminist ideology does not mean that you're anti-women or anti-women's rights, right? We're being critical of all the toxic anti-male bullshit which is constantly spewed out by mainstream feminism, not just the radicals. So first of all, being anti-feminist, or being anti-feminist ideology, or being anti-feminists who are anti-male, or whatever you fucking want to call it, that is not being toxic, okay? That is being critical of basically is what is a hate movement, or aspects of the feminist movement which are filled with hate. So I think it's just natural that some men including myself, would be fed up with that bullshit, with the demonization of males and masculinity, and just say enough is enough. Right? And at the very heart of this shit is the mainstream feminist movement. And you can't deny that. The very term toxic masculinity is the perfect example. And secondly, we're constantly distancing ourselves from non-MRAs, which are constantly being accused of being MRAs. We're saying, hey, you know, that guy over there you're calling an MRA, he's not an MRA. He doesn't represent us. He's not part of the movement. Yet your side continuously does it. Do you not get that, Garrett? Do you not get that that's a problem? Do you not get that your side is making things worse by doing this? Do you not get that your side is desperate for a fucking argument because this is what they do so often? Otherwise, why not criticize legitimate MRAs? Why not go after people who actually advocate for men's rights and declare that they're an MRA? I mean, you go after Paul Elam, sure, but that's just about it, really. 90% of the people that your side criticises and attacks have nothing to do with the men's rights movement. Fuck, I wish I had $1 for every time Roosh or Return of Kings has been accused of being an MRA.
According to the media, I run the biggest men's rights site on the internet. So Return of Kings, for the past year, they keep saying that Return of Kings is a men's rights site. I've come out to say it's not. And look, I have criticized men's rights. I've said don't practice it, but they're still doing it.
So, I mean, if we can't distance ourselves from them, right, how are we supposed to distance ourselves from any negative MRAs within the movement, which, by the way, we do anyway? Oh, but hold on, that's right. You class being critical of feminist ideology as somehow being hateful, don't you? That's what you consider to be a negative MRA.
Look, I understand why people dislike radical feminism. I get it. That is a fair opinion. I dislike most of them as well. Fuck those people that disrupted the University of Toronto thing. That sort of crap just makes the problem worse.
I would agree with you, Garrett. It does make the problem worse. And it creates more hate on both sides. But to just declare that all those people are red femmes and to say that there is no element of that in the mainstream is really delusional or dishonest on your behalf. Seriously, Garrett, this stuff is a mainstream problem.
In that debate I was having with the MRA, we basically ended up in a circular reasoning kind of situation, in which I told him that the anti-feminist element gets in the way of the activism because it serves to marginalize those associated with the movement, resulting in a critical loss of credibility, and the will to engage on the part of those in the position to affix any change just evaporates.
And once again, the funny thing about this is that's exactly what we've been saying about feminism for a very long time now. All the anti-male stuff. And I'm not just talking about on Tumblr or Twitter or in the comment section of a YouTube video. I'm talking about the mainstream, I'm talking about in the media, I'm talking about in the universities. All that mainstream male hate bullshit. The toxic masculinity bullshit, the rape culture bullshit, the patriarchy theory bullshit. All that stands in the way of legitimate work that feminism should be doing, that a legitimate women's rights group should be doing. Instead, it's just come down to basically male hate, and that's where we get nonsense from. Like manspreading or air conditioning being oppressive or whatever. The assumption is that anything that a man does, or anything that men do, that in any way makes a woman uncomfortable, is always based on misogyny and somehow males wanting to dominate and all this other bullshit. There's always this nefarious fucking motive behind it in the eyes of feminists, which is always to do with the evil male stereotype and the female victim that we constantly come back to time and time again. I tell you what, Garrett, cut all that bullshit out of your movement, and once again, let me repeat, you watch all the anti-feminists disappear. Well, most of them anyway. The vast majority of them will disappear. But as long as you have all that bullshit in your movement, as long as you have all that ideological male hate in your movement, all that fucking dogma right at the heart of it, as long as you have that, there will be anti-feminists. That simple.
I didn't say it in that many words, though, obviously. This was on Twitter, after all. And he said that he can't stop focusing on feminism because feminists keep trying to disrupt attempts to set up men's rights groups on university campuses. But then the MRM's reaction to these kind of disruptions is to demonize all of feminism in, frankly, some tinfoil hat kind of ways. And that both, pisses feminists off because it's an association fallacy and a composition fallacy, and it alienates the MRM further from everyone else. And now that feminists are even more pissed off, it leads to more and more conflict between the groups, and now it's a cycle with no end in sight, no truce likely on the horizon.
Association fallacy, Garrett, you say? Well, that's very interesting. I think I covered extensively in my last response to you how feminism uses the association fallacy constantly with MRAs, when non-MRAs are constantly referred to as men's rights activists, when some stupid shit they've said or done is used to demonize the men's rights movement, even though they are not part of the fucking movement. Now, as I went through that extensively in the last episode, I'm not going to go through all that material again. However, I thought it would be interesting to actually take a moment and look through some of the examples that Garrett uses in this very video that I'm responding to, because he does put up numerous examples which I'm guessing are meant to be examples of MRAs, while he's talking about not using the association fallacy and other such things. So he has a number of tweets from Jack Barnes. Now, in this case, he is actually correct. Jack Barnes is an MRA. So far, so good, Garrett. So far, no false associations. You're 1 for 1. But let's look at the others. So the first one on the list is Nick Blankenship. Now, I tracked down Nick's Facebook account. It's easy to do with his name and with the photo on the example that Garrett gave. So I know I've got the right guy here. And I've had a look through his friend list, and there is no one that I recognise associated with the men's rights movement. I'm not going to put images of them here for obvious reasons, but I don't know anyone in his friends list who in any way is associated with the men's rights movement. In Nick's description, he doesn't mention anything about being a men's rights activist. And there's not really much I can tell from his timeline, as I'm not on Nick's friends list. But I really see nothing to suggest that Nick Blankenship is an MRA. Clearly, he dislikes feminism, in particular Clementine Ford. Now, I would assume that he's responding to the fact that Clementine Ford got someone fired for leaving a rather nasty message to her on Facebook. Now, you may not be aware of this, Garrett, but that pissed off more than MRAs. And just because this guy's pissed off at the actions of Clementine Ford and feminists in general, does not make him an MRA. You see, that's what would be a good example of the association fallacy. Now, if you have some evidence that this Nick Blankenship guy is an MRA, you can show that he's posted somewhere something which is pro men's rights, or he belongs to a men's rights group or whatever, please go right ahead, Garrett, and post it in the description below, and I will fully acknowledge it in a future video. But I'm suspecting that you've just made the assumption that this guy is an MRA because he said something nasty to a feminist. So you're actually guilty of what you're accusing us of, but it only counts when we do it, right? Is that what you're saying there, Garrett? Now, let me be clear, I did do a search other than just his Facebook page. I did search for his name and the tag men's rights, and I did get one hit. It's an article from MSN called End Violence Against Women, Secret Facebook Group Names Men It Says Troll Women Online. And they have the picture of Nick Blankenship with his nasty message towards Clementine Ford. Now, the article does mention MRAs. Well, it kind of does. Let me read you the quote here. I put up with it for years and thought it was normal until a couple of pieces I wrote got attention from the MRA, the Men's Rights Association in the US. Now, there is actually a Men's Rights Association. It's in India. I'm guessing that's not the Men's Rights Association that the quote is referring to. I'm guessing they're just so completely ignorant about the men's rights movement, the MRM, that they refer to us as the MRA. And this is something I've been seeing quite a lot from the feminist side of the fence. In fact, Garrett does it in this very video.
That is my point. The MRA focus on false accusations and
and I've seen it in a lot of other videos too lately, where the feminist in question has referred to the men's rights movement, the MRM, as the MRA.
Say is, and this is my beef with the MRA, and we can start getting into that a little.
Jokes at the expense of men. It's the outrage at this kind of thing that shows how the MRA are merely a reactionary movement.
These people have grown up with their own abuse issues and haven't dealt with it. And we've been asking the MRA and asking the MRA and asking them to please just start making it okay for men to start talking about these things and getting help that they need to deal with their issues.
I have to suggest, if you can't even get our name right, and maybe you don't really know that much about us. Now, that's not completely true in Garrett's case. He obviously does know somewhat about us. But in general, if you think that we are called the MRA, right, as opposed to the men's rights movement, then you're probably pretty ignorant about us. But anyway, I'm rambling, so let's get back to the other example that Garrett gives us. Someone called Tanner Waterbury. Once again, it's another name I've never heard of, someone I don't know. So I did a search for Tanner Waterbury on the internet and could find no association with the men's rights movement. I did find that the image that Garrett used had been retweeted quite a few times on Twitter, and clearly the message was aimed at Clementine Ford. Once again, being critical of Clementine Ford and feminism does not make you an MRA. Now, if Garrett can provide some evidence that this example is an MRA, once again, I'll acknowledge that in a future video. But I honestly couldn't find any. So it's interesting that the two most hate-filled examples that Garrett uses are not actually MRAs. Isn't that interesting? Well, not that I can tell anyway. I would think that if we're so hateful and bigoted like Garrett and other people say, then he would have been able to find some more, hateful and bigoted comments, other than a handful of messages from Jack Barnes and a couple of guys who aren't MRAs. So, if you want to talk about the association fallacy, Garrett, you really should take your own advice, mate. Because at this point, you're looking like a massive hypocrite. It looks like you're criticising us because we call mainstream feminists like Chanty Binx a mainstream feminist, when you're insisting that she's actually a red fem, which the evidence would suggest that she's not. While at the same time, you're using non-MRAs as examples of why we're bad. But we're the ones using the association fallacy, right? Now, there is one other example that Garrett uses, and it's Paul Elam, who is obviously an MRA, but I'm going to save that one until a little bit later in this video. That one gets its own special reply.
If there was a men's rights group that was just about men's rights and wasn't misogynistic, and it was clearly condemned all misogynistic crap and all this anti-feminist bullshit, I would totally be an ally to that movement. I would make videos supporting them. I would do anything I could to highlight their goals. But at the moment, it's pointless to highlight men's rights goals because the movement is hurting the achievement of those goals, not helping.
Now, this is really funny because it's exactly how I feel about feminism. If there was a feminist movement, or to be more exact, a female rights movement, which didn't go around demonizing men or masculinity, as feminism constantly does, but just focused on the actual issues that women have and focused on dealing with those issues, then yeah, I'd be behind it 100%. In fact, I consider myself an egalitarian as well as an MRA, because egalitarians also focus on women's rights. But as long as there's all this anti-male, anti-masculinity, toxic shit at the core of feminism, I'm not going to identify as a feminist, nor am I going to support the feminist movement, and I'm going to continue to call myself an anti-feminist. Now, yes, I know not all feminists are like that. I know there are feminists who actually, focus on women's issues and are doing good. I don't doubt that, and I've pointed them out numerous times before in videos. I'm not saying every single feminist on the planet is a bad person. My argument, though, is with the ideology at the core of feminism, which most feminists, the ones in the spotlight, subscribe to. It's really that simple.
Look, my first video on this channel was about men's rights talking points. Of the 8 I discussed, 4 of them I view as legit goals that I'm on board with.
Yep, and that's the video I'll be tackling next.
I want to see change on that stuff. I really do. But I can't associate myself with the men's rights brand, and until such a time as there is a variant of it that is not a thinly disguised hate group, I'm not going to be able to do that.
A thinly disguised hate group because we disagree with feminist ideology. Well, that's strange because I consider all the anti-male and anti-masculinity stuff from feminism, which is why I'm an anti-feminist. All that stuff I consider to be hateful, which would make feminism a hate group, would it not? I mean, if you had the KKK going around claiming that African American culture or African Americans are toxic simply because they're African American, they would be called a hate group for that, and with good reason. Not that they need to do that to be called a hate group, but you get my point. When you make blanket statements about males and masculinity, and all those statements are fucking negative and hateful, that would make you a hate group. Now let me stress, we are not anti-woman, we are not anti-women's rights. We are anti-feminist ideology, because that feminist ideology is anti-male and anti-masculinity. It really is that simple, Garrett. And you can try to, straw man us, or try to use red fems as a shield, or use false associations as false examples of MRAs, and do all that other shit, right? But it doesn't change the facts. Now, during this, during the clip I just showed of Garrett, he showed a tweet from Paul Elam, and it's part of the hashtag shoot a feminist in the face. Now, once again, this is one of the reasons why I'm not on Twitter and don't intend to ever open a Twitter account, because I just see this bullshit going back and forth between MRAs and feminists with these hate-filled hashtags, really to be pointless. I don't think it really achieves anything. I don't think it advances the conversation. What you've got, is it 140 characters or something you've got to make an argument? Really, in that space, all you can do is ad hom, straw man, and a couple of other things. You can't really make a good argument in that space. Look, I know there's a lot of people who disagree with me. I know there's a lot of people that use Twitter. That's fine. You can do that if you want. In my opinion, though, it's bullshit. I much prefer making lengthy, well thought out arguments with lots of evidence, which is why I make these bloody long videos. To me, that's a much better medium, but each to their own. But back to the hashtag, right? You know, hashtags like shoot a feminist in the face or kill all men or whatever. I really don't see it achieving anything. I think it's a waste of time. But the thing is here, Garrett, if you're going to use that as an example of MRA hate, right, then why is it that you excuse similar hate from feminists? I mean, listen to this clip.
One of the things I sometimes see feminists engaging in that really bothers me is when they make sweeping negative statements about huge, broad groups of people on the basis of things they cannot control. Here are the three main examples I see of this, by which I mean expressing these sentiments in their own words, not using this exact phrasing. The middle one I see especially often. I once got dogpiled on Twitter for objecting to a trans person saying this. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that the vast majority of times this happens, the person doesn't actually hold these views. They're usually venting due to a negative experience they just had. I get that. I know that when most female feminists say the first one, they're not actually man-haters, they are just expressing frustration about something a man or a group of men just said or did.
So do you think Paul is maybe just venting over something a feminist said or did to him? Do you think maybe he's just frustrated with feminists and feminism? What's that, Garrett? No? You're not applying the same set of standards to Paul as you would female feminists who spread anti-male hate? That's strange. That almost seems like a double standard, doesn't it? Now, look, I'm not going to stick up for Paul on this one. I don't think shoot a feminist in the face is productive in any way. I think he probably did. I don't speak for him, obviously, but I think he probably did it as a shot over the bow of feminists, and he did it to stir the pot and, you know, cause some kind of controversy. I don't know, I'm guessing. Maybe he just was frustrated. Either way, I don't think it's very productive. I will say, however, that he is targeting a specific group who hold an ideology, which is feminism. He's not saying women in general, okay? Whereas the kill all men type thing is generalizing about an entire group of men who hold different opinions and different views and different values. I think it's very different to target a group which holds a specific group of ideas or ideals or ideology or dogma, as opposed to generalizing about an entire group of people which hold many different views and opinions and ideologies. So in that sense, I don't think shoot a feminist in the face is as bad as kill all men. But having said that, I still don't think it's very productive and ultimately a waste of time, in my opinion. But, Garrett, the point is, if you're going to excuse feminists who say kill all men, right, if you're going to just excuse them away as, yeah, it's wrong, but they may have had a bad day or a bad experience or whatever, you then can't turn around and use our side doing something similar as an example of how we're a hate group. You can't hold that double standard and be taken serious. Another point I could make, Garrett, is that the examples that you've shown, some of which weren't even MRAs, is just in social media, whereas the hate towards men that I'm talking about is part of the mainstream media and academia. I would suggest that that makes it very, very different. But let's continue.
And the other thing I discussed in that video was that feminism doesn't actually have any causal link to any of this stuff. It just doesn't.
Feminism has no causal link to this type of stuff. So it hasn't been feminists who have been saying for years now that men don't have any issues. That they weren't feminists, or they were just red femmes, maybe. Is that it, Garrett? It hasn't been feminists who have been saying that, sure, men have issues, but they're all the fault of men. So it hasn't been feminists who have been saying, sure, men have issues, but they're not really that important. We need to deal with all the female issues first. Once we've dealt with all of them, then maybe we can actually deal with some of the male issues. Which is interesting, because a lot of the time they talk about air conditioning being sexist or manspreading, but ignore things like male suicide and male homelessness. That's interesting, isn't it? We have to apparently prioritise people's issues, not based on severity, but based on gender, and then we'll focus on the trivial bullshit that a lot of the mainstream feminist movement focuses on, and use that as an excuse to ignore serious male issues, as opposed to dealing with everyone's fucking issues, right? I mean, to my way of thinking, that would be the solution, to deal with everyone's issues. But no, we can't do that. We can't focus on men's issues yet, because there are still some women in offices who feel a bit chilly sometimes, and that's a major concern. Now, yes, I know there are legitimate female issues as well. I don't deny that. I don't deny there are legitimate female issues that should be dealt with. I'm more than happy for a group to deal with it. But we see this bullshit all the time. We see bullshit being prioritised, and it's wasting time and effort. Seriously. And the exact same people minimising or dismissing men's issues as if they're nothing. Serious issues. I would say fucking suicide is a serious issue. We have an issue there, considering the rate that men commit suicide at. That is a serious issue. And we can tie all this back to the basis of the modern feminist movement, the mainstream feminist movement that sees men as nothing but perpetrators, domineering oppressors, and evil shitlords, right? And women as nothing but innocent victims who can not possibly do anything wrong, but are constantly oppressed and persecuted by those evil men. Basically, their way of thinking is, we can't allow males to actually have issues, because that takes away from the oppressor image, doesn't it? If we acknowledge that male privilege isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and that maybe women have a degree of privilege as well, well, that would fly in the face of feminist ideology, wouldn't it? I mean, you can't really acknowledge the male homeless issue, because, well, that might show that not all men are privileged, domineering, oppressive shitlords, would it? You see, that's the problem with the mainstream. They look at the men at the top, and they ignore all the men at the bottom. Because if they were to acknowledge the men at the bottom, their ideology would fall apart overnight. So, I mean, is that what you mean by can't be linked back to feminism? Just wondering.
Sure, there are rad fem groups that disrupt men's rights stuff. I get that. That's bullshit. You know, any decent feminist out there wants to fight that.
Yeah, Garrett. The problem is, though, it's not just the red femmes. Okay? You can't use them as a shield, because we're talking about the mainstream as well. That simple.
People should be able to gather privately and talk about activist causes without being derailed by outsiders. That's fine.
And I would agree with you 100%, Garrett. And that goes for MRA groups, that goes for feminist groups, that goes for atheists, religious groups, whoever, right? As long as they're not causing anyone any harm, they should be able to gather and discuss their issues. Unfortunately, out of all those groups I mentioned, feminism seems to be the only one stopping another group from doing that. That's
totally legitimate. Now, I didn't make this video to have a go at MRAs, Because I really do think that men's rights folks who are obsessed with anti-feminism, who rave about feminists all the time and don't make a distinction between rad fems and feminists, what they're saying is they don't understand what mainstream feminism is, they're misrepresenting it, they're putting out misinformation about it by not making that distinction. They're alienating people who care about this stuff, they're alienating neutral people who could be convinced to care about this stuff with compelling rhetoric.
And actually this is pretty funny because Garrett ignores all these things done by his own side. I know he's friends with Kevin Logan, and Kevin Logan very rarely puts up a feminist video which somehow isn't attacking men's rights or the manosphere in general. So, I mean, is he just obsessed with men's rights and doesn't really care about feminism? Or is it actually fair criticism? You decide, Garrett. But I suspect you hold a different standard for someone on your side than someone on ours. And exactly the same argument can be made for people like Dave Futrell. All he does is shit on the manosphere, and in some cases it's with good reason. But a lot of the stuff he writes is just bullshit. But he doesn't put up articles just about feminism or just about women's rights. He actively attacks our side. That's basically all he does. So you can't really criticize us for criticizing feminism without criticizing your own side, who do nothing but criticize us and other people in the manosphere, and often falsely identify others in the manosphere as MRAs. There actually seems to be somewhat of an industry of criticizing the manosphere in general. So, once again, Garrett, please don't hold a double standard, okay? Please don't hold us to a standard that you don't hold your own side. Fair, right?
Rick, if anyone listening to this does know of a group that is legit men's rights who clearly and explicitly distances themselves from toxic shit, let me know, because I really would like to know about that. I'd like to support that.
And let me echo Garrett's request. If anyone knows of a female rights group which isn't anti-male and anti-masculinity, please let me know, because I would like to support it. That simple.
Anyway, those are my thoughts on this. In conclusion for this video, if you've got anything to add or if you think I got something wrong, let me know in the comments. But I implore you to keep it civil, and I will endeavour to do the same. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the end of the first of Garrett's videos that I'm critiquing. So let me just do a quick summary of his argument. He's basically saying we can't hold the entire group responsible for the actions of a subgroup. Now, a metaphor for this might be the Westboro Baptist Church, for example. Now, you can't hold all of Christianity responsible for the actions of the lunatics in the Westboro Baptist Church. You know, that group that go out and protest funerals and things like that. If someone were to say that all of Christianity is responsible for the actions of that small band of lunatics, then that would be wrong. So that's basically what Garrett is saying. But he misses the point. You see, as an atheist, I don't believe in the Bible being the Word of God or the resurrection of Jesus. And therefore, I disagree with all of Christianity, because that's one of the cornerstones of Christianity. And for the record, that doesn't mean I think all Christians are bad or whatever. I just disagree with that particular belief system. Now, that particular belief system is not unique to the Westboro Baptist Church. Okay, it is across the entire Christian community. Basically, if you don't believe in that, you are not a Christian. And that's how men's rights activists see feminism. It's not just the red femmes we disagree with. I mean, sure, we disagree with some of the shit like the TERF bullshit. That's something I can agree with the mainstream feminist movement with. But we disagree with basic feminist ideology, toxic masculinity, rape culture, patriarchy theory. We disagree with them, and we disagree with the anti-male bullshit, which seems to be at the core of the mainstream feminist movement. or the anti-male hate. Once again, it's not just the red femmes, it's the entire movement. Now, the interesting thing is, at the same time, they conflate everyone in the manosphere as being exactly the same, right? And label them all MRAs, which is fucking crazy. That's kind of like saying, because some Muslim terrorists flew a plane into some buildings on September 11, that we should hold the Dalai Lama responsible for that, or a Jewish rabbi or something, because they're all religious, right? They're all under the umbrella of religion, and therefore they're all exactly the same because they're all religious, right? Well, that's basically what the feminists are saying when they use the blanket term of a manosphere, which has some very broad different groups within it, with different beliefs and different ideologies and different methods and different actions, right? When they just use the blanket term of manosphere and put everyone in the same basket, they are effectively misrepresenting those groups, particularly when they claim that all those groups or all of the manosphere are men's rights activists. This is clearly fucking bullshit. So I have to say that Garrett really misses the point in his video. He gets nowhere near the target. And I'm sorry, Garrett, but I'm not going to let you get away with using the red femmes as a shield. Trust me, I've no love for them. Okay, that's something you and I agree on 100%, and I'm sure there's many things that we would agree on. But at the same time, you really don't get to use them as a shield. Now, I think I've got a little bit of time left, so let's have a quick look at the next video of Garrett's. I'm going to critique. I don't think I'll get very far into it, but we can have a quick look.
Hello. This video is an examination of some of the most common issues brought up by men's rights activists. Many of them are real, serious issues, but most are either misunderstood or misattributed in some way. Also of note is that there don't seem to be any widely espoused solutions to most of these problems on the part of the men's rights movement.
Well, that's interesting, because I always try to bring up solutions, and I'm not the only one. So, yeah. But let's continue.
I like to be upfront about my worldview, so I want to make it clear that I'm a feminist, specifically a third-wave intersectional feminist. I am interested in both the activist and academic sides of the movement. This channel is new, and my goal and reason for making it is to introduce more dispassionate and informational content on gender-related issues and subjects. One of the focuses of this video is how many in the MRM blame feminism, at least partially and sometimes wholly, for the issues they highlight.
Yeah, that's not exactly true though, is it, Garrett? I mean, we blame gynocentrism, we blame the empathy gap, and we blame society in general. Now, it is true that in many cases, feminism makes these issues worse from our perspective. The perfect example is the feminist organisation called Now, which is actively fighting against shared custody. This obviously isn't going to help fathers who want custody of their children. This is a feminist organisation doing this, and they deserve criticism for it. There's also feminist organisations that want to get rid of female prisons altogether, which is ludicrous. I mean, there's already a sentencing gap where men are more likely to be arrested, more likely to stand trial, more likely to be found guilty, and more likely to get a longer sentence if found guilty than a woman who has committed the same crime. Okay, that's the sentencing gap. But we have a group of feminists out there who are trying to shut down women's prisons because, well, women don't deserve to go to prison when they've done something wrong. Only men do. And of course this goes back once again to the ideology, which is the evil man as the perpetrator and the innocent woman as the victim. You know, that gender stereotype that modern mainstream feminism is built upon. And then there's also the issue that a lot of feminists insist that the only way we can talk about these issues is through feminism. If you don't discuss them through feminist ideology, they actively shut you down, or attempt to, as we've seen at universities. There was a case last year where a guy wanted to start an organisation at a university in England to discuss male suicide. He had a couple of friends who had committed suicide within a short time of one another. And he wanted a group where men could go and discuss male issues. He wasn't an MRA, he was actually against the men's rights movement, and he's actually pro-feminism. But the feminists shut him down anyway, and said the only way he can discuss these issues is through the pre-existing feminist organisation. And the pre-existing feminist organisation clearly stated that they were set up only to discuss women's issues. Do you not see the problem with this, Garrett? Do you not see an issue with this? When your side insists that we can only talk about it through the feminist lens, through feminist ideology, and then that same ideology insists that we can't talk about it, you're going to get people being pissed off and disagreeing with you. That's simple. But please, Garrett, continue.
I'm going to discuss here how that is not the case in any significant way, and how some of their issues are actually being actively addressed by many feminists today. I chose 8 talking points to look at for this video. Obviously there are many more than 8 MRA issues, but I wanted to keep my first video of manageable length. A lot of the talking points I decided against including are openly misogynistic, and I felt they would be unfair to highlight in this kind of video. I also decided it would be unjust representations of the MRM to choose any of their arguments that are outright fabrications. I tried to go mainly with issues that are to some degree real, but are being discussed without all the facts being adequately represented or considered. This meme has a point. MRAs have a tendency to bring feminism into the discussion in ways that are not supported by the facts, and it is men that are mostly to blame for these problems.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I think it was around the half an hour mark in this video I said something about one of the ways that feminists dismiss men's issues is to just say, oh well, it's the fault of men anyway, so it's not really an issue. And and here we have Garrett saying exactly that. Well done, Garrett. Thank you for proving my point. But let's continue.
I'm not saying that as an attempt to demonize men. I'm merely pointing out that of the two genders, men had more of a hand in creating these issues than women did.
Oh no, that's not demonizing men at all. When you blame all of women's issues solely on men, and then you blame all of men's issues solely on men, that's not demonizing men at all. No. I mean, saying that society in general is to blame is clearly just somehow bigoted or something. I don't know, but yeah, clearly just blaming men for everything isn't in any way demonizing them. Not at all.
Sometimes much more, as I will demonstrate in this video. The issue here is that not enough divorced men have custody of their children, and the reason given for this is that final rulings in custody hearings favour the mother.
Now, that's not exactly true now, is it, Garrett? The issue that we bring up is the bias in the family court. Alright, we're not talking about parents who decide by themselves where the children should go. We are actually talking about those who go to court, those men who seek custody, and the bias against them. So, yeah, you haven't really started off being too truthful here, have you? But let's continue and see where you go with this.
Whether or not this issue is a serious problem is debatable in terms of numbers, as I will explain, but I can say with certainty that court orders have very little to do with the reason for it.
Yeah, tell that to the fathers who are committing suicide because they've lost all access to their kids, Garrett. They don't really matter though, do they, mate?
What does have a lot to do with it is observable differences between the genders and how they think about custody. Both genders have what I would describe as positive and negative attributes in this area, and I will address all of that, and why the MRA argument doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Oh, I see. So gender roles are okay when they are positive towards women. Okay, got it, mate. Continue. Go on.
And I apologize for using binary gender terms, but for the purpose of a discussion like this, I felt it was necessary. This page has a ton of interesting and compelling statistics.
Oh no, not the divorced peers page, which seems to be quoted a hell of a lot by feminists lately. I mean, I debunked this last year, way back in Propaganda of Toxic Feminism. I think it was number 23, when I was replying to Kevin Logan. For a start, the statistics are almost 20 years out of date, so you probably could have found something more up to date. But I tell you what, Garrett, even though I don't think this is a particularly good source, for the sake of argument, I'm gonna go with it, and let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's correct, and see what conclusions you come to.
But let's focus on the top part for now. As you can see, this is about what the mothers and fathers want in terms of custody. Women are quite black and white on this issue. The large majority of them want sole custody, almost none of them want the father to get sole custody, and not many go in wanting shared custody.
And of course, this part has nothing to do with bias in the family court. Alright, what we're talking about is when fathers actually go for custody, their likelihood to actually gain custody. We're not talking about ex-partners who decide amongst themselves who the child goes to. That's not the issue. Although, let's be honest here, Garrett. Let's look at this a bit more broadly. You would agree, I hope, that there is an expectation on society that men be the main provider. This means that often they spend a lot of time away from families, occupied with work. This is an expectation put on men by society in general, including women. Right? Women are a part of society, so I'm not blaming just women, but they do take part of the blame, as do men. Note the word society there, Garrett. So this expectation, this gender stereotype, if you want to use that term, makes it hard for a lot of men to actually gain custody. Now, I've got a friend who is in this situation. He and his partner separated. They had a daughter. And because of my friend's work commitments, they had an agreement where the daughter went with the mother. And he saw his daughter every second weekend. Now, he wasn't entirely happy about this. I mean, he wanted to see his daughter more often, but because of his work commitments and because he is paying off the house that his ex and child were living in, and he had all these financial commitments, not only his own, but also for his ex, which he was paying off. Because of those responsibilities, he was unable to take custody of his child. But his ex wasn't the most stable of people, and after a while she decided just randomly to stop him seeing his daughter altogether. He now hasn't seen his daughter in well over a year. This devastated my friend. This really, really devastated my friend. I was actually concerned that he might hurt himself for a while there. So what are his options? Well, his options are to go to court, which he's been looking into, but he comes across brick wall after brick wall after brick wall, and that doesn't even take into account the cost, which is devastating, to say the least. Oh, and I should point out that if he were to get custody of his daughter, he would change his working conditions, he would adapt. And that's what we need society to do. We need the working conditions for fathers to be more adaptable, and for mothers to pick up the slack and put in more time at work. Of course, this would help with the wage gap, wouldn't it, Garrett? Considering men spend more time working, it only makes sense that they earn more. But if we had more fathers with more custody, those fathers who want custody, that is, and then freeing up time for mothers to spend time on their career, that would help the wage gap as well. But of course, what Garrett is doing here is really just a distraction, okay? He is talking about something that we don't have a problem with, and trying to use that as a distraction for what we actually do have a problem with. And he will then combine these two things together and try to dismiss the actual problem. I've seen this so many times now that I know what's going to happen by heart. In fact, I think it's the exact same thing Kevin Logan did using these exact same statistics. It's a really dishonest tactic.
On to the men. As you will note, the numbers here are more mixed, and roughly speaking in thirds. 1/3 wants the mother to have sole custody, 1/3 want that for themselves, and 1/3 want shared custody. When you take this data into consideration, it is obvious why more women end up with sole custody than men. More women want it than men want it.
Yeah, but Garrett, the point is we're not talking about the men who don't want it. We're talking about the men who do want it, and the men who go through mediation or go through the court system and have a bias system set against them because of their gender. Alright, it's got nothing to do with the men who don't want it. What you're doing here is fucking dishonest. Now, let me give you a metaphor, alright, just so everyone can understand this. Imagine you wanted to do a statistical analysis of how many people survive plane crashes, right? So what you would do is you would find examples of plane crashes and you would analyze how many people survived the actual crashes and how many people died, right? Now what you would not do is add in figures from planes that did not crash, right? Planes that took off successfully, flew without incident, and then landed safely at the other end. If you took all those people from those planes and just added them to the number of survivors of plane crashes, it really wouldn't give you an accurate idea of how likely someone is to survive a plane crash. Now, it would give you an overall view of the likelihood of someone dying when flying in general. But if you wanted to look at specifically plane crashes and the likelihood of surviving, you would not add in planes that did not crash. And that is exactly what you are doing here. You are trying to dilute the biased figures from the court system by adding in cases that did not go to court. How can there be bias in the family court system against people who did not go to court in the first place? This is just dishonest, Garrett. It's straight out fucking dishonest, mate. Alright? You are seriously just trying to deceive people with this shit. Either that or you're completely ignorant. I don't know which one it is. I'm guessing you're being dishonest here.
Perhaps more importantly, more men want the mother to get sole custody than women want the father to get sole custody. Now I will move on to why court-ordered custody decisions don't play a major role, by first looking at how much of a role they do play, and then looking at what kind of a role they play. Let's take a look at the next set of stats. 51% agreed on their own, so half of all custody decisions do not involve a dispute. 29% of custody decisions are disputes that are resolved just between the mother and father, so that leaves 20% of all custody decisions that involve a third party. Over half of those are handled by mediation and do not go through the actual courts. Of those that go to court, half of those are resolved without trial after an evaluation. Of most of the ones that do go to trial, most of them do not get all the way to a verdict or court order. 1.5% of all custody decisions involve a court order.
Now, I find this very interesting, Garrett, that you point out how few cases make it all the way to the end. Do you remember way back in part 1 of my response to you? I had a look at some rape statistics concerning the court system. You know, the court system that you consider biased against rape victims. And looking at these statistics, we can clearly see that a large number of women withdraw their case. Now, as I pointed out, there are a lot of reasons for this, mainly because rape can be particularly hard to prove, and these cases can be very hard to go through. I fully understand that. But the point is, why so few rapists actually get put on trial is because of the large number of people withdrawing. Now, do you think maybe, Garrett, do you just maybe think for a second that the reason so few custody cases end in a verdict is because of the number of fathers who withdraw early. Why do you think that might be, Garrett? Do you think it might be because the court is stacked against them? Do you think it might be because of the cost which is put upon them? Now, I've no doubt if these circumstances were reversed and it was women who were having to foot the cost and fight an uphill battle to get custody of their children, it would be seen as patriarchal oppression. It would be seen as a bias system. It would be seen as another example of how women are oppressed by the evil men's. Yet here we have a system which clearly favours women and discriminates against men, and we have people like you, Garrett, just dismissing it, while with a straight face claiming that you want equality. Well done, Garrett, well done. I can't think why people would be pissed off at feminism. I just can't imagine. Seriously.
Now for the third set of data. This is about custody disputes involving a third party, which, as I stated before, accounts for 20% of all custody decisions.
So you mean the 20% that we actually have the issue with, and now you've finally got, after all the distractions that you've presented, you've finally got around to the actual bit we have a problem with. Well done, Garrett, well done. So let's see how you twist these figures.
Of these, the amount of sole custody for the mother resolutions is lower for disputes involving the courts than it is for mediation.
Now, did you see the dishonest sleight of hand trick Garrett has done here? What he has done is he's compared mothers with sole custody after mediation to mothers with sole custody after evaluation or trial. What he hasn't done is compared mothers getting custody after mediation to fathers who get custody after mediation. And if we look at that, it's 63% to 6%. But of course that wouldn't suggest a bias at all, would it, Garrett? When both parents go for custody and they go through mediation, mothers are 10 times as likely to get custody. Okay? Now, I'm assuming in a lot of these cases the fathers just give up because they are faced with the brick wall of the system. But obviously, if they have started mediation, then they, at least at some point, wanted custody before they were crushed by the system or cost. And if we compare evaluation and trial, right, mothers get custody 44% of the time, fathers 11% of the time. So mothers, even when they go to trial, 4 times as likely. But there's no bias there, is there, Garrett? No, of course not. No bias there whatsoever.
It's notable that sole custody for men does not increase all that much, and the difference primarily affects joint custody outcomes, which increase significantly. This is something that is a potential cause for concern and interest, while keeping in mind that we are talking about 1/5 of all custody decisions.
No, Garrett, we're talking about 100% of custody decisions that are sorted out by a third party, whether it be trial, evaluation, or mediation. That's what we're concerned with. We're concerned with that 100%, okay? We're not concerned with couples who decide on their own. That's not the issue. That's just a smokescreen put up by people like you. What we're dealing with is that percentage which rely on the system, be it mediation, evaluation, or a court trial. That's what we're concerned with. And the statistics that you show here, Garrett, the very statistics that you use, those very statistics support our point of view. So Garrett then concludes with this real problem. Custody decisions favour women because men seek custody less than women do. Well, no, that's not really true, is it? If you have 2 parents going to court for custody, obviously they both want custody, correct? If the mother wants custody and the father doesn't, then they don't go to court over it. They decide amongst themselves. But if both parents want custody, then they go to court over it. And when they go to court, mothers are favoured above men. Now what Garrett has done here is he's lumped in all the people who decide on their own to water down those court statistics as much as possible. Like I said before, if you were looking for the survivability of a passenger on a plane crash, what you do not do is take into account all the planes that have not crashed. That would be illogical and dishonest. And that is exactly what Garrett does here. He is attempting to water down the statistics as much as possible as a form of distraction, so as not to have to deal with the actual issue of there being a court bias in favour of women. Because that would be terrible to admit, wouldn't it, Garrett? But Garrett said earlier that we don't offer solutions, we just criticise feminism, which is of course bullshit. So let me offer the solution which I've offered, I think, just about every time I've talked about this issue, and I've talked about it quite a bit. It's quite simple, really. What you do is you start off with 50-50 custody after a separation. So the mother gets custody 50% of the time, and the father gets custody 50% of the time. Split right down the middle. Now, I do realise this isn't going to suit all families. That's fine. That's no issue. You start with 50-50 custody, and if the father, for example, wants less custody because of work commitments or whatever, then what you do is you work that number down for him and up for the mother. But you start with equality. You don't start with a bias. You start with equality and then you work from there. And I would think that feminists would be in favour of 50-50 custody, because as I mentioned earlier, it would give mothers more time to work on their careers, which would be combating the wage gap, right, Garrett? If women worked more hours, as men do, if there was an expectation that mothers should be putting in more hours at work, like there is that expectation with men, then the difference in earnings would diminish over time. I mean, that is one of the major factors in the wage gap. But anyway, folks, that's it for this episode. So I'll continue debunking this video by Garrett next episode.
And yes, that goes for everyone who still calls the MRM the MRA. You know, I don't refer to feminists as the feminist. However much I dislike their chosen ideology, I still recognise the difference between an individual and their group. I recognise it enough to have learned two different fucking terms. Feminist and feminism. That's just one letter as well, but it's a very important difference. Like a one-eyed bearded salamander having a fight with a moosefish.